Hello, and welcome to the Drone Network, the only podcast in the air and on the airwaves. I am your host, Bryce Bladen, and on this show, we explore the tech, economics, and people piloting the world's largest standardized drone imagery network. Each episode, we explore how drones are reshaping industries, creating new economic opportunities, and literally changing how we see the world. On today's episode, what makes a successful drone pilot? Today's guest is Graham Anderson, Ops Manager for Spexi Geospatial. Managing the world's first autonomous aerial data network with over 8,000 registered pilots means Graham sees patterns most people probably miss. Today, he's sharing what the data actually shows about who succeeds, who struggles, and what the world's largest drone network actually looks like in practice. Graham, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Bryce. Nice new name. I like where we're going with that.
Well, thanks. It feels a lot more appropriate if we are documenting a drone network to call it the Drone Network. And I got to say, I love Drone On as a podcast name, and it seems like there are at least 6 other podcasts that had the exact same idea, even just last year. So we're going to see if we can carve out a little bit more original of a space for us.
I like that. Well done.
All right. So Graham, I wanted to have you on the show today to basically talk about what you have seen over, frankly, years of managing thousands of drone pilots in terms of what makes people succeed. How has that contributed to the network? How has that shaped it? How has it been challenging? What do these pilots look like? Is there a real way to succeed as a drone operator? And maybe even some interesting tidbits from it. Maybe we'll just dive in.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump right in.
All right. Well, let's start with, frankly, the topic of the show. What, in your experience, makes a successful drone pilot? What makes a pilot successful when they're using the Spexi app on the LayerDrone network? Either way, I would be really interested in your answer there.
Yeah, I have a great anecdote that I like, and I don't know if I've ever told you this or too many people this, but after our Surrey Alpha, we held a meetup, sort of a celebratory, drinks at a brewery. Congratulations, we collected 2,000 Spexi missions. We invited all the pilots, so there were about 20 pilots there. And when it ended, I was leaving with our COO, Alec Wilson, and I said, they're all the same. And you couldn't put your finger on it. They were very diverse. They were different. I mean, mostly male, but that's a typical STEM space sort of thing. But they were young and old. They were of a variety of races and backgrounds, but there was something about them that was the same. Like as you had the conversations with them, as you talked to them about, what they liked about technology, what they liked about robotics and drones and sort of why they had gotten into the space, there was just something that you went, man, these conversations with all of them have some intangible similarity. And so I keep that in my mind because I think there is something about the type of person that maybe likes aviation, likes drones, is interested in technology or robotics, at that stage. And even now at this stage is still to some degree an early adopter of a technology, right? Drones are still fairly new, as much as they're not in some ways. And so, that was an interesting anecdote because I think what makes a successful drone pilot generally is someone who enjoys the technology, enjoys the activity. There are a few, some are a little more to the creative side, some are a little more to the technical side, some are maybe more about the building and the flying and the aviation, where others are about the data or the derivative. So there are, there is some variation, but something about really liking new technology, liking the idea of flying something, which it's almost, I don't like to call it a toy because they're a great tool more than that, but it is a little bit toy-like. It's fun. There's an aspect of fun to it. They're very passionate about the space, about the tool, about, their equipment and their setup and their gear. And so that was just something that I know, and I've continued to notice that as we meet them, throughout these different events that we put on, there is an intangible sameness to a lot of the drone pilots.
That's fantastic. So speaking of those intangible qualities, are there certain personalities or backgrounds that seem to correlate with top performers? You actually have something a lot of people don't, which is in addition to thousands of pilots and years of experience to pull on, you actually have data that you could look at in terms of these people seem to do this well. And what's your experience been there? I've had a few interviews with the community, and I've likewise been blown away by the diversity, but also the similarities that I've seen in backgrounds and in personalities.
Yeah, there's certainly an aviation aviation aspect. So whether that be in manned aviation, crewed aviation, avionics, or in like RC model airplanes, in the early days that then transitioned into drones. So an enjoyment of or an interest in aviation certainly seems to be a pattern. Another is either maybe military, maybe first responder, maybe sort of something in the public service and security sort of space seems to be a trend. So we get people, whether they be, police officers or ex-police officers, firefighters, people who participate in search and rescue, things of that sort. And then the other is often the sort of the creative. So they lean a little more towards the photographers, the media and marketing type creatives that do video editing, things like that. So those are kind of three maybe buckets or backgrounds that you see a fair bit of within the drone space generally and within the Spexi community on Discord. We don't always know everyone's background. They don't, whatever they choose to share as they're talking within the community, but often it seems to fall into one of those buckets.
I think I've noticed the exact same thing, and maybe this is a preview for some upcoming episodes, but I've had 3 interviews with the community either held or lined up. The first of which was with a drone first responder, and the second of which is hopefully with somebody who flies drones for the military, and the third of which is somebody who does drone photography, which actually does seem to hit all 3 of those segments you mentioned.
Yeah, it's they're backgrounds that lend themselves directly to the activity, the hobby, the skill, the trade, whatever you want to sort of call operating a drone, and so they're an easy on-ramp, I guess.
Well, let's talk about the on-ramp, because something I'd be particularly interested in is what is the path between a pilot joining the LayerDrone network, flying for the Spexi app, and sticking around? Like, how do you guys manage to actually get people to do that? And how many people stick around? What's the time between a pilot registering, flying their first mission, and then potentially flying their second mission? Where do you see drop-offs, and where do you see challenges, and where do you see opportunity?
For sure, yeah. I mean, we have targeted a niche, not a niche, but a space in the market that we think exists, which is the transitory hobbyist to semi or casual professional.
So specific.
It's very specific. So there are some highly professional drone operators who I was familiar with from my work prior to Spexi in the drone operation space, who are doing high-end mapping or inspections. They're doing high-end engineering work. They're doing large-scale mapping projects, and those operators earn quite a good living flying drones, often high-end, quite expensive drones, or coupled with expensive sensors, and the data that producing is highly valuable. They're incredible. For them, Spexi mostly doesn't offer probably doesn't meet their expectations for earnings. It may be an augmented type of income, but for them it's probably they look at it like, well, that's not maybe worth my skill or my equipment or my time, because we do operate with micro drones, right? And the hobbyist, our hypothesis starting out, and it has proven to be true, is that a lot of people buy a drone, a small drone, thinking that it's going to be A, fun to fly, and B, might open up some opportunities for work or for a side hustle or a small business for them. And it can be quite hard to find those clients, to line up that work, to do quoting, to do marketing and get yourself out there and have people know that you do the service. And really their interest, as we've just discussed, is in drones and in flying drones and in having the gear and the equipment and sometimes tinkering with it or even building their own things. That's their passion. Their passion is not being a business development person for a drone business or doing sales or client interactions. And so we hypothesized there would be this group of people that would like to get out and fly their drone and be rewarded for doing so, but also just given a reason to get out in their community and in their city and maybe move around a little bit and fly their drone and earn some rewards. And they would find the flying and the data collection to be fulfilling and fun, along with obviously rewarding. And so that's the target market, essentially, for the Spexi drone pilot is we find a lot of them are retired from these, sometimes from these careers that we've discussed. Another cohort of them is young, sort of hustle culture, the gig type worker that wants to make as much money as they can. They like to move around. They like to sort of chase the launches and the rewards and move up leaderboards. They're a little little more in that space. And so, we promote that sort of engagement, that sort of community and activity. And it has been an interesting balance, with people that come in and consider themselves a professional drone pilot, sort of maybe almost being disappointed and going, oh, this isn't as, I can't earn as much as I wanted to, or I think that I'm worth. And, we don't want to be involved in what a lot of people see as sort of the race to the bottom in terms of payment. We want to pay a reasonable amount for the effort and energy involved. We realize it's a lot of work being out there all day, every day, but there is a subset of people that we are targeting, and the pay reflects the cost of equipment, the risk of entry, and things like that. So it's been an interesting journey, sort of trying to parse and separate out those groups of pilots and understand who's who.
One thing I'd be curious about is if the relatively autonomous nature of flying a mission might be one of the blockers for more experienced pilots, as it were. To put this in context, I know somebody who flies drones as a videographer for sets and things of that effect. And when I told him about Spexi, very interested, still is very interested, to be clear. But his number one question was, how do you avoid amateur pilots from crashing into XYZ, yada, yada, yada? And I told him the drone effectively flies itself. The operator, the pilot, makes sure it doesn't crash into anything. And he wasn't disappointed, but he was like, oh, I get it. That's how you can scale the network to thousands of potential drone pilots. Because for context, if you guys have never seen a Spexi flight, if somebody takes on a Spexi mission, they take their drone to the Spexagon, they let the drone take off, flies for about 7-8 minutes autonomously. They got to keep it within sight, but the operator probably isn't controlling that drone unless it's about to run into anything. Graham, please feel free to correct me at any point, but I think the last step there is they upload their data.
Correct. And to be clear, there are a whole bunch of these small 7 or 8 minute missions, right? And so they're rewarded per mission, but each one's exactly the same. And so something actually, interesting about drone piloting, it sounds like your friend flies in sort of the cinematography space, or the sort of the media, and they're within that space, and then also within the FPV, the first person viewer space, or the drone racing space, there is some fun, like exhilarating drone flying. That's one like avenue of being a drone pilot. But actually, a lot of the professional pilots in the more technical spaces, like the thermal mapping, the inspections, the LiDAR or graphic mapping, they're already running automated flights. They're quite comfortable. Now, they're often always basically setting the parameters of those flights themselves to optimize for the data output that they're, planning to sell to the client. So if, traditionally you had been a drone service provider that offered a mapping or a LiDAR service or something like that, a lot of the work, the engaged work is in the pre-planning. It's in the creation of the mission. It's in the mission and operation development. It's working with the client to go, what exactly are we trying to collect and derive from the information? And then, okay, we're going to set up the flight in this way or that way so that it provides that data deliverable at the end of the day. But from launch to throughout mission collection, the drone is flying an autonomous, pre-planned, automated flight. Inspections might be a little different. If you're filming for a commercial or a movie, obviously then, they're still doing a lot of pre-planning in terms of, with the shot they're trying to achieve. But that's where you start to see some real, like, I don't want to say skill as a pilot, because both pilots have a skill, but like flying, controlling the drone in the air skill is really prevalent in that like film and cinema and media space, not so much in the technical engineering mapping space.
I have some questions sort of tied to what I'm seeing over if you guys go to explore.spexi.com, you can see the entire network that Graham effectively manages the operations for. And one thing I'm seeing in North America, at least, is pilot activity seems to be seasonal. What does that actually look like in practice? Because it's not just a matter of you as a drone pilot being like, I got to plan my summer this way, I've got to plan my winter this way. It's you as an operations manager looking at, and if I'm not mistaken, there are hundreds of thousands of missions on the network right now. And basically, you are doing a lot of that upfront predictive work about where missions could be flown without necessarily knowing that the conditions are right there. Anyways, how seasonal is pilot activity? Where do we see drop-offs? And how do you guys deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, seasonality is a macro trend in the space, but weather, in all types of aviation is sort of the one Achilles heel maybe, or the constant unknown and the constant, variable factor that you just have to deal with. So what we do as a network, it's more a factor for us of image quality and data value. So a lot of what we are attempting to create, sell, deliver is the ability for customers to derive insights from the imagery collected and sold on the network. So the goal of the client is to identify some feature, maybe identify some change over time, maybe get a count of something, an understanding of the space that they're looking at. And if everything's covered in snow, that's hard. So there's a flying aspect of it that the drones don't perform as well in extremely cold weather, that obviously pilots maybe don't want to be out when it's minus 5, 10, 20. There's some operational risk in that time and space, but there's also just a data quality in that time and space that you're going to have more rainy days that are difficult to fly. The data is going to be collected slower. It might not stitch or process as well if it's snowy. So in an effort to avoid essentially data that comes in that is not valuable or not saleable, we shift or adjust capture geographies, mostly based on just historical weather patterns. So south in the winter, north in the summer. It's pretty simple in the end.
Makes a lot of sense. I noticed that Spexi they launched the biggest expansion in network history in December. 40 southern states, hundreds of thousands of missions, RP only, points only instead of cash, but a great way for folks to get started. And couldn't help but notice that was roughly around the same time winter started, so makes a lot of sense. One other thing I'd want to bring up there is, especially for this network, is when extreme weather happens. So obviously seasonal, at the macro scale, you can make some relative predictions. As it gets colder, more southern. As it gets warmer, open up the north again. But extreme weather happens. And when extreme weather happens, I've noticed that there's, I don't want to call it an opportunity. Frankly, let's call it a need to image the disaster. And if I'm not mistaken, there was an atmospheric event in the Pacific Northwest in December, and Spexi and LayerDrone pilots actually imaged the highway number 1 coming out of Vancouver, Chilliwack, I believe. Is that true?
That is true, yeah. Through Abbotsford and Chilliwack, so Fraser Valley, just to the east of Vancouver, British Columbia, there was, as you mentioned, a heavy rain event and significant flooding, and we were able to help with some of the just emergency response, general situational awareness in that case.
Interesting. So yeah, it's a knife that cuts both ways. The macro scale, you can make some predictions. The micro scale, stuff happens and the network needs to functionally adapt, I suppose. But it's very interesting to see. Let's talk a little bit more about those pilots. I'm really curious. What are you seeing in terms of how people approach flying missions for the network? Like, how many of these people treat it as a full-time job, treat it as a gig job, treat it as a little treat they can do if they're in the area? One thing I noticed, again, explorer.spexi.com, there's a leaderboard there, and the top pilot just broke 10,000 missions, which is truly remarkable. That is over 1,300 hours of flight time at my 7 or 8 minute mark. But the next highest pilot there is at around 8,000 missions, as I recall, which is still extremely remarkable, to be clear, but that is quite a gap. But at the same time, if you keep going down that list, you'll see a lot of people around that rough range, and I'm sure there's a drop-off. So anyways, let's get to the question. How do people approach flying for the network? Weekend warriors, gig workers, full-time, traveling drone pilots? Tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, the way we've launched the network to date has been quite geographically dispersed, with not a ton yet, although we're moving towards some added recurring capture, right? There's two aspects of image value. One is net new, so adding new imagery to the network, and one is for change detection, so essentially recurring captures of the same area so that you can spot differences, you can see how an environment is evolving over time. For obvious reasons, during the initial stages of the network, our goal was to expand geographically, majority net new, which means as a pilot, if you live in city A, you live in Phoenix, when we are capturing in Phoenix, that's great for you. There's lots of missions around in Phoenix. Once we're done, we don't have, we have not had historically a lot of regular recurring missions in Phoenix on a weekly or monthly or quarterly basis to date. So we have a a large group of pilots who we attract, who are, again, the same niche group, or this cohort of pilots who are hobbyists or light professional pilots, maybe retired pilots that like to go out, they capture the Spexigons, they fly the missions while they're there. It's kind of one job, maybe among others, that they take on in their small drone business. We do have a group of pilots, a cohort of pilots who have adopted essentially a nomadic traveling lifestyle that have followed these campaigns around, more in the US. We haven't seen that as much in Canada, although there was some in Western Canada and Eastern Canada, a little bit more isolated. I have noticed that this group of pilots in the US travels quite extensively across just about the entire continental United States. They will appear for these missions. And so they are, treating it as more or less full-time employment. It's their earnings. It's how they're earning their living. That's a relatively small group. They're great. We've met many of them at different events that we throw, because often in conjunction with an event, we will launch a campaign or a group of missions. So in order to, in one sense, attract them to that area, get them to fly, we get the data, and we also get to have an event and meet them and, learn about why they do, why they like to fly for Spexi, what they'd like to see us improve. And we get great feedback from those events. So that's, I would say there's probably a group of like between 10 and 20 pilots that, will move quite long distances to continue flying fairly regularly. They take breaks on and off and they have their hometowns, but when something comes up that's within a reasonable distance, they'll move to that city and capture those images. So you kind of got that split, and that's where we see someone getting, 5, 8, 10,000 missions is, we're talking over the last year and a half, earnings in the anywhere from kind of $50,000 to $120,000 range. So fairly reasonable ability to earn. Now, obviously, the more you move around, the more costs you have. So you're looking at trying to trade off efficiencies of travel. And many of these are younger pilots that, maybe their lifestyle is such that it allows a bit more freedom. They enjoy that ability to travel and earn and see new places and experience, other things. For someone, say of my own, more middle age, with family and roots, that doesn't make sense. So I would be a pilot that might fly if there was missions nearby, but I wouldn't travel around the country to chase the Spexigons. But it comes down to sort of your willingness and desire and ability to move with the network. Long term, our goals are much more to have a more regular, recurring capture sort of cadence, and so local pilots that don't want to move so much would be aware and available of that cadence, and it would be, for some, it might just be your extra cash. And for others, it would be an augmentation to the other types of jobs and work that you do with your drone or otherwise.
Interesting. So if I'm not mistaken, to put it simply, over the past 18 months, as you put it, though, you gave a great expression of earnings. And I'm curious if there have been any experiments on incentives or sort of trying to understand pilot behavior. And if you have any insights there on what you found.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we come from, we being a sort of our executive group and myself come out of the drone pilot space. We understand to a degree the pilot mentality. We understand what a reasonable day's earnings is. We want pilots to feel like they can earn their worth. Again, within this niche, there are pilots that charge thousands of dollars a day for their services with very high-end equipment and very highly trained professionals, and that's not our target market. But for someone where you might compare what they're doing to another gig economy type work, we'd like to be at the higher end of that. We'd like them to be able to earn a solid hourly or daily rate of pay, at least while there are missions in the area. The network isn't specifically designed for pilots to travel all over the country, but if they can find the efficiencies there and make that work, we certainly don't discourage it. The rate of the pay we try to hit when we're paying cash for these missions is sort of in the $40 to $60 an hour range, depending on your equipment setup, your efficiencies, your ability to charge batteries on the go. There's a whole bunch of variables, your weather, so there's some things that are outside of our control, and each pilot gets to decide how much they want to invest or what drone they have. Some batteries are longer lasting than others. Some mobilize on e-bikes versus a car, right? That's going to change your earnings capacity depending on how you mobilize around the city. All those things are sort of a little bit outside of our control, but we try to hit that $40 to $60 an hour range, assuming there is a good number of missions in your area, which we think is very reasonable for that group and cohort of pilots. There are also missions, as you mentioned a few moments ago, that are right now for points only, that are reputation points within the network. Those have a couple of utilities and play into some of the larger things that we're building out. But essentially, they're a way for pilots to build up their reputation on the network in advance of paid missions, which would allow them to then reserve those missions before other pilots can get to them, etc. So they provide some utility within the application, and they are also part of a broader strategy between Spexi and LayerDrone.
Interesting. I've asked you about the onboarding of new pilots, but I'd be really curious, when somebody flies a mission, how long do they stay active? Like, what's the jump from flying your first mission to flying your next? And how long do they stay around after that?
Yeah, I haven't seen too many pilots fly just one, but there is definitely a drop off after sort of what we offer right now. We have colloquially dubbed a requestagon. So you are able to request a group of Spexigons that allow you to sort of test the network, and they're paid. So these are paid missions. We will put them, at a convenient location, which you select. So as a pilot, you can select a location, be that near your house or at a park that you like to fly at or whatever it might be. And we will essentially place the missions over that geography for you to go collect that little bit of money and understand how the network works. It makes sure that you have the right equipment. It makes sure that you've connected your payment, set up properly and that everything's performing as it should. We have a handful of pilots who request those and never fly them, but that's not very common. There is a cohort of pilots who request them, fly them, and probably just decide, maybe that's not for them, or that, there's not much else in the area, and anything, any other paid missions might be too far away, and so they'll just wait. But we find that to be fairly successful in terms of having pilots understand the ease and simplicity, of flying on the network, and then moving to capture more of those missions, particularly if they're within a reasonable distance. Once people get going, they seem to like it. I think, we do a fairly good job of attracting that right target market. And when we do, they start to fly, and they usually then end up flying until the missions in their acceptable geography are exhausted, essentially. So they'll fly quite a lot.
Interesting. All right. Well, now I want to get into the weird, the beautiful, and the ugly. What's the weirdest thing you've learned about drone pilots in your job?
Oh, the weirdest thing I've learned about drone pilots. And I want to focus on the positives of the term weird. This is in no way, ever meant to disparage. Well, one interesting distinction, and this is a bit of a licensing distinction, but the understanding of the term autonomous and the role as a pilot between Canada and the US has been a little bit weird for me. We have had some pilots have incidents where they sort of, they assume that the application will do more than it does, and they don't necessarily want to accept responsibility. That might be a user type and a person type. So that's been weird at times to go, wait, what makes you think that you weren't responsible for this decision? I guess I would call that weird. Other than that, I think that they, and this might be more about the money than the flying the drone, but sometimes they'll push limits that I might not, as an operator. In terms of rain, we had a pilot try to cut a hole in the gimbal cover so that he could fly the drone and continue working in the rain, which I thought was ill-advised. So that was an interesting one. So I hope maybe those two suffice as weird, but in a positive way.
Weird and wonderful, Graham. Well said. Speaking of assumptions, though, did you have any assumptions about pilot behavior, or did Spexi as a team have any assumptions about pilot behavior that frankly just turned out to be wrong?
We were surprised by the traveling pilots. That was never sort of, when we initially launched the network, that was not something, because we hadn't really priced for that. We didn't think. We felt like our hypothesis, our goal was that there were local pilots with DJI minis. It's the most prolific drone in the marketplace. It's sold at Costco and Amazon and Best Buy, and we assumed there would be lots of these pilots all over the place, and we priced the missions accordingly. So we priced the missions assuming that there would not be an extensive amount of travel involved, in a half hour's drive or an hour's drive maybe, but not hotels and flights and days and things like that. And so when we saw that happening, that was surprising for sure. It was unexpected. And we went, oh, that's the same, that's the same user that we saw in Austin has now just shown up in Tampa. Like that to us was like, how did he get to Tampa? It was quite which was great. It was an aha moment, like a light bulb, like this. People like this, right? It told us that people really enjoy doing this. They like it. And they want to do more of it. Otherwise,
keep giving me non sequiturs, Graham, and I got to just jump on that one.
Go ahead.
Which is, you mentioned the aha moment. What else has surprised you most about operating this network, whether it's dealing with pilots or whether it's an operational bottleneck? What else has surprised you?
I haven't dealt with pirates, but pilots.
Let me enunciate, please.
Yeah. It's probably been communicating the larger vision. It's been a real bottleneck, might not be the right word, but it's challenging still for me 3 years in to describe, least of all to a pilot, but to anyone, to my wife, what the vision is at the grandest scale, right? What we're trying to build. And so oftentimes this creates within the community a desire for, and understandably so, the pilots want features and functions, as a user that serve their purpose both immediately and locally, right? But when you're trying to build a network, not only currently that encompasses all of Canada and the United States, but that you plan to scale out over the entire globe, there are decisions and trade-offs that you make where you say, well, actually, it doesn't make sense for us to integrate some third-party accessory within the application that's going to provide specific information for pilots in Indiana, right? Well, the pilot in Indiana would love that. They would love, and they make suggestions that would, from their perspective, would make their life easier, would make maybe things more efficient, it would be great. But for us, we're looking at, will this scale when we move to Europe? Will this scale when we move to Australia? Is this something that we can do at whichever stage, at the planning stage, at the mission deployment stage, at the capture stage, at the sort of operational safety and enhancement stage? Is this something we'll be able to do globally? And if not, there becomes reasons where we go, you know what, that's not going to be a priority for us until this thing is at such a level of maturity, because our vision is so grandiose, I guess. And when you have that vision, you have to make those difficult decisions, and those are hard decisions to explain, because to a local pilot, they go, why wouldn't you do this? Like, it's difficult to share that. And again, that's not their vision. Their vision is to go out on the weekend or Thursday afternoon and make a few bucks and put some money in their pocket. So that's totally understandable. But balancing those things has been one of the, call it a bottleneck, call it a challenge with building the network and managing the desires of the community.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense that functionally the biggest challenge here is balancing the micro and the macro. A pilot's going to see what's in front of them, and you have about 8,000 pilots that you're trying to connect in a way that it builds into something bigger than any of them could achieve on their own, and ideally is exponential. Before I let you go from this Q&A period, I gotta ask, topic of today's show, what makes a successful drone pilot? Any last second advice for folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think patience and preparations, call it my 2 Ps. Maybe I'll come up with a third one. I don't know. I learned very early on when I started flying drones, that it is aviation. You are trying to earn on any job. When I was flying as a drone service provider, whether it was a real estate gig, whether it was some sort of mapping, or survey operation or an inspection, you're trying to earn. So you're trying to move efficiently and relatively quickly. But what was the saying from one of the car racing movies I watched recently was slow is smooth and smooth is fast, or something like that. I can't remember the connection, but it was, the idea that sometimes it's faster to take that extra few seconds and double check something than deal with the consequences of not having done so. And so, I think success in the Spexi network is about being operationally efficient. It's about, making sure you're set up properly. It's about understanding aviation and airspace a little bit, at least to a degree that allows you to operate safely. it's also, about testing different iterations of how you go about things. We see a variety of strategies when it comes to the way people move through the missions, whether it's in blocks or in lines or, kind of in different groupings. But I think being patient, taking a little extra time, understanding, what is being asked of you, what the requirements are. We continue to be, building an application that has never been built before. We're the first to admit that while it is quite impressive, it is quite, we think quite an incredible application, it has its faults. And these are challenges that arise because of these different operating environments, because of the different user groups, because of the different drones that we fly with. And so I guess if you want to feel successful as a Spexi pilot, you want to prepare and you want to be patient. I love when I see the pilots, like they share screenshots of, the different tools that they use, from software tools to iPads, to do their mission planning and to understand how their day's going to go. And I think those are the pilots that really succeed, are the ones that take a bit of time beforehand to prepare and to make sure their flights are going to go smoothly and safely through their time operating.
You gave me another sequitur there. Speaking of pilot sharing, I posed this question to the community this morning before this call, actually just a couple hours, and I've gotten a few dozen responses. I'm going to share a few of the best ones. Very first, this is actually advice you gave someone, Graham. Always have your controller in your hand and your drone in sight. Solid. Next up was don't crash. Very good. Top piece of advice for Spexi and frankly any drone pilot who's actually doing data work: double check that your SD card is in and that it is ready to record. Follow-up tip, keep a few spare. Actually, those are both from Marcus K, who actually has a Spexi tutorial on YouTube too, which I will include in the show notes here. Bottle Top also suggests don't fly what you can't afford to lose. Great advice. Don't lose the drone, but very good advice nonetheless.
Yeah, so Uzi. Can I dive in on that one? And it's
you sure can, especially because I just gave myself an intro into Uzi, which is related to that.
And it's happened, not too many times. I don't want to say more times than I can count. I could probably count them, but the times it did happen, it was very frustrating. Is that your SD card gets corrupted, you misplace, you write over something, you don't have the SD card in. Now nowadays drones will tell you don't have it in, but they didn't used to. You used to fly a mission. You could fly a whole mission and bring the drone down. All right, it went and it looked like it was taking the images, but they were not recorded to anything, and you have to refly the entire mission. With Spexi, one piece of great advice I've seen is to not have too much data on the card. As much as you might operate as safely as can possibly be operated, no drone is going to be perfect. And so from a corrupt card to a battery that goes dead to a motor that burns out and the drone falls from the sky and you can't recover it, I often tell the pilots, in the community, if you've flown 30 flights, 30 missions that day, SD card, every mission you fly, that SD card is increasing in value, right? By the value of the mission, because it's holding the data until you upload it to the network for your reward. And so I know, a few operators that will have multiple SD cards that they switch out throughout the day.
Excellent. I'm going to continue my rattling off of great advice, particularly around don't fly anything you're not prepared to lose. Community member Uzi, who unfortunately last week did crash a drone into a crane, and shared it with the Discord and his lessons. It all came together well, but poor went out for a real one. Their advice: don't play chicken with range and airspace that says they freeze your drone. Don't play with low battery. Allow the drone 20% battery to come home. Anything less than 10 and it might just start landing itself. And don't fly around schools or kids. Parents get upset. Very good advice. Two last pieces I wanted to make sure we got out there. Independent Galliform. Even if you don't take a course, do some reading and go write an exam. He recommends the basic or advanced in Canada. Probably not required, but you will learn things that are handy to know. He also had the Spexi specific tip, and it's related to the requestagons. Fly some of those RP missions. There's a lot of open capture ones on the network right now, literally over 100,000. And if you do those, you request your missions from Spexi, you can then use that RP to reserve those paid missions. In fact, just flying one of those open capture missions would give you a lot of RP for just that. And this brings me to my last tip from Tuned. The best tip I received when I started flying was to fly figure eights to develop stick control. Start with cinematic mode on the slowest speed limits in your backyard, then work up to sport mode in the park. Really, really like that one. Probably could have used that when I didn't know what sport mode was. I'm not going to tell you what happened, but it did not look good. And I'm going to leave that there for the community contributions. We've only got a few minutes left, Graham, but we're approaching your favorite part of the show, the fun segment. Do you have time to answer a couple questions about drones that aren't really related to drones?
I do have some time for that. Yes. I will add one more on there. Learn, as much as Spexi is an automated flight platform, and we do get some relatively novice pilots, especially in Canada where the license is not required for commercial operations, spend some time and learn to fly the drone manually. Learn to take back control from the automated flight mission, learn to change the mode, as you were alluding to, from sport to cinematic to normal, because that will immediately pause the mission. So just understand the capabilities, be able to, fly, to stop, to quickly respond, because almost all the time nothing happens, but the moment something does happen, you want to be ready to react. And whether that's a low-flying aircraft coming into your airspace, or that's a building or a goal that was a little closer than you thought that it was, you want to be able to react quickly. And those are stressful situations. And so if you're inexperienced or have never really flown the drone manually because you've just been letting Spexi or another auto, you just won't react as quickly. Your brain doesn't, immediately remember how to take back control or what to do in terms of evasive maneuvers. So that little bit of practice also will hopefully never have to pay off, but when it does, it'll pay off big.
Excellent advice. All right, that's enough good advice. Let's get to the useless stuff. It's time for a brand new hit segment, DYKYD. You know what that stands for. Do you know your drones? All right, so I'm going to give you some clues about drones from pop culture. If you can guess where it's from, you win. I'm going to give you 3 clues for each. More points, the fewer clues I have to give you. Do you watch a lot of movies, Graham?
No.
Oh, this isn't going to go well. All right, let's have fun with this. Very first film. This drone appears in a Christopher Nolan film, and yes, it does come in black.
It's the only one that's popping into my head right now, which is The Dark Knight.
Fortunately, The Dark Knight was the one with the little bat pod motorcycle thing. No, this is going to be... I'll give you the next clue. The drone is a helicopter-like vehicle with a practical 3,000-pound model.
As I can remember other Christopher Nolan Batman movie names, the next one that's popping to mind is The Joker, and I'm just throwing guesses at a dartboard here.
Unfortunately, that was not Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
Yeah. The big difference there is I don't think Christopher Nolan's ever done a musical, which is unfortunate. I would love a musical from Christopher Nolan, but no. In this one, Christian Bale pilots the drone and flies it autonomously. Spoiler alert, by the way, you were extremely close, Graham. The Dark Knight Rises, the sequel to The Dark Knight.
I couldn't remember the name of it. I knew there was one in there that I couldn't remember the name of it.
They're very similar. And look, you have a family and a life, whereas I watch a lot of movies. On to the next one. Let's see if you can recover here, because this is an even less known film. All right, so in this 2013 film, a man named Jack Harper repairs drones 60 years after aliens attack Earth and destroy the moon.
Jack Harper, 60 years after. Sorry, I had to put the whole clue together in my brain, so I'm talking myself through it. 60 years after aliens have attacked and destroyed the moon, someone named Jack Harper. I've probably seen this movie, but if you ever ask my wife, I've watched half of a movie a second time that I have already seen this movie. So that's how well I remember movies. So I'm literally just guessing that it's going to be like, it's not Arrival, because that one they talk to the... No, I got nothing, Bryce. Nothing here. Clue number 2. Hit me with clue number 2.
All right. Second clue. I don't think this is going to do it, but the drones in this film are spherical and equipped with weapons.
I want to say like Tomorrow War or something. Is that newer than that?
It's a little too new. I'm going to give you the last clue.
Yeah, do it.
Tom Cruise is Jack Harper, and he meets Morgan Freeman's character while repairing a drone.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds like a Tom Cruise. He was in War of the Worlds, but that was earlier than 2013, I think. But I'm going to guess War of the Worlds.
Fortunately, in War of the Worlds, those drones are piloted by aliens. They're not actually drones. They're just called that. This is Oblivion, 2013, a film almost everyone forgets ever existed.
Yeah, I think I've seen it.
Wears a sporting white suit throughout it.
But forgotten it. Seen it and forgotten it thoroughly.
Of course you have. All right, this one's just for pride, Graham. Can you get the last one?
I like it. You stumped me today. I've done so well on the last two that I'm happy that you brought me something more challenging.
I think you have the best chance with this one, but famous last words. In this film, the villain's power comes from controlling an army of weaponized projection drones.
That's where the power comes from. Or that's why the villain is powerful?
That's their power. They use drones with projection. Like a projector.
Like a screen?
Like what you'd watch watch TV on.
Projector?
Or like a holograph, you know, if you wanted Tupac to dance.
Put on a concert. Post Thomas.
Yeah, this villain would be perfect for that.
No, nothing. Next, I don't think I've seen this.
All right. Second hint. While the film is named after our hero, he goes by Night Monkey in Europe.
A night monkey. Film is named after the protagonist, the hero, not the villain, but the hero goes by the name of Night Monkey.
To be clear, that's not the film's name. They have a different name they usually go by.
Yeah. Oh, is this I'm assuming it's like a Marvel or superhero type movie?
Might be a Marvel film.
Might be a Marvel symbol, not the MCU. Last clue. Hit me with the last clue.
All right. Now, this is actually I submitted it to IMDb as a film goof. Jake Gyllenhaal's character was somehow able to pilot his vast quantity of drones in London, England without the appropriate licenses.
Jake Gyllenhaal is, can I ask if he's the villain or the... I have no idea.
He was the villain, yeah.
He's the
Why
villain.
don't I answer that for you?
Pilots his drone. No, I have not seen a movie where Jake Gyllenhaal is a villain and pilots drones, so I have no idea what this is.
It's unfortunate. It's the little indie darling Spider-Man Far From Home, 2019. Jake Gyllenhaal plays Mysterio.
Is that the one where all the Spider-Mans come back?
Nah, that's the next one.
I saw that one.
Let's get you watching some other films. All right, Graham. I've taken up more of your time than I intended to today. I would say where your prize is coming from, but unfortunately you did not earn one today.
No prize on that one. I'm going to have to get on my drone movie. I knew as soon as you told me that was going to be the theme that I was going to struggle with this one.
Yeah, I saw the look in your eyes and I knew I did something really mean to a coworker today.
That's great. Hopefully it's entertaining for the listener.
Appreciate all your time today, Graham.
Thanks, Bryce.
Thanks for being a part of the Drone Network. Subscribe wherever fine podcasts are served to get a new episode every week. And remember to leave us a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. It helps a lot. Today's show was sponsored by Spexi Geospatial and LayerDrone. Learn more about standardized drone imagery built for global scale at spexi.com, that's SPEXI.com, and layerdrone.org. Thanks again for listening.